welcome everyone. Oops. Now we started recording. So very nice that so many wants to join us. This is the third time. So I guess now it's a tradition. And we have a short webinar then on what is new in the breakpoint table, this time version 14. And my name is Karianne, and then with me is Anna-Karin from Sweden, Ingvild from Norway, and Heikki from Finland. So we are the breakpoint team in NordicAST. And then also Erica, Christian, and Barbara will join us today, help out with questions and answers. So we'll start out as we usually do, then approximately 1 hour for presenting the changes, and then we would like questions, and you can ask questions anytime, use the chat functions, but most of these questions we'll try to answer at the end so that we don't get interrupted all the time. I've said many times now, remember to stay muted so that we don't get any unnecessary noises. And then this is recorded as we always do, and will be then posted on the website. So next. First, like we usually do, I'll just run through real quickly what does the NordicAST table give you that the UCAST doesn't. And then we'll go through the changes, the general changes and notes, breakpoints and brackets, ATU topical agents and KPD breakpoints. And then we'll go through each of the species specific changes. And this year we'll also have a few extra slides at the end. Christian, he will go through what to do when there are no breakpoints, because that's new this year, that the PK or PD breakpoint sheet is taken away. And then, like I said, at the end, we'll take questions, and we love questions, but use the chat function so that we can answer everything afterwards. Next. So what does the NordicAST table give you in addition to the UCAST table? Well, we try to adapt it to the Nordic countries. And one main difference is that we only include relevant agents. So we have not included all of these in blue, piperacillin, triclosan with and without clavulanic acid, cefoxitin, and cefodoxime, apart from the screening. Delafloxacin, eravafloxacin, cyclinamine, nitroxylin, doripenem, chloramphenicol, except for topical use, and then the oral ampicillin and ampicillin sulbactam. Because these are agents that we don't use and are not available in the Nordic countries, so we figure they're not relevant to us. In addition, we do not include agents with a dash and only a few agents with the IE. And then we include a little with the epidemiology of resistance, and also include places where we figure if you find resistance, send the isolate to the reference laboratories. And all notes or comments that are in the NordicAST table but are not in the UCAST table, we mark in red so it's easy to see. But there are no contradictions or exceptions from the UCAST breakpoints, so we use the exact same breakpoints. So we have a common English trunk, but then all the comments are in the Nordic languages. And we also think maybe it's a little more readable that we have the comments right next to the agent that we're talking about. So we have it in Norwegian, in Swedish, and in Finnish. And then we include the same flow charts as the NordicAST and the UCAST table, but we've translated them. And for the Norwegian and Swedish breakpoint tables, we also have additional flow charts for the Enterobacterialis and the Pseudomonas. Next. Yes, and then there are contact persons in each country. We have it at for the last slide, and it's also posted on the our website. So one of the things we have in addition to the breakpoint tables is explanatory methods documents. And we have several, and in the last few years now we're trying to update them. And at the end of 2022, both anaerobes and the Pseudomonas was published. And then right around the corner, we will publish then a new version of the CPE detection, ESBL AMP-C detection, also Haemophilus. So I think by the end of February, these all will be available. So now we go just talk about the changes. And when it comes to general changes, there aren't very many, but you'll see a lot of yellow boxes when it comes to the MIC methods boxes. And pretty much the main change is that we've added the cation adjusted Müller-Hinton broth. And then we have for the vancomycin also included that the glycopeptide MIC should be read after 24 hours of incubation. And then for virulent streptococci and enterococci, the recommendations related to acquired aminoglycoside resistance is changed a little, so Ingvild will show you that. And then telithromycin is removed from all tabs. So that's pretty much all the general changes. And then when it comes to notes, next, there isn't anything new. In the UCAST table, they have marked the dash explanation in yellow, but we already changed this last year, so there's nothing new in the NordicAST table. So now I leave the word to Anna-Karin.
Yes, and then I will go through the changes regarding breakpoints in brackets, the ATU, the topical agents, and the PK/PD breakpoints. And regarding the breakpoints in brackets, from breakpoint table version 13, we already had 4 combinations that were brackets. And the new one for this year is that ciprofloxacin for the Staphylococcus species should be reported with an I in brackets. And just a short reminder of what that means. It means that you should report it with a comment, not an I in this case. And the comment should include do not use in monotherapy and do not use with an, and the comment should also include that you should use it with another active agent or an active action. So for this combination, the ciprofloxacin and Staphylococcus species, that means that you should use the high dose of ciprofloxacin in combination with, for example, rifampicin. And Ingvild will tell you a little bit more about how we have put that into the breakpoint table later when she talks about the Staphylococcus. Regarding the ATU, there are no new ATUs in the breakpoint table version 14. There are some revised ATUs that are very welcome. They are revised ATUs for cefiderocol in Enterobacterialis and in Pseudomonas aeruginosa. So that's quite good for us since we now have to use disk diffusion, and the MIC problem with cefiderocol seems to be a never-ending story. Okay. Then we have some small changes in the topical agents sheets. We usually never have any changes there, but this year there are some revised cutoff values for Staph aureus and ciprofloxacin and levofloxacin, and also a slightly revised comment regarding Staph aureus and mupirocin. And then, as Karianne said, the big news for this year from UCAST is that the PK/PD breakpoints are removed. And there is still a sheet in the breakpoint table that is called the PK/PD breakpoints, but when you go to this side, you only will find an explanatory text and telling you the reasons behind this change. And Christian will also tell you more about this at the end of this session. Then we have changes for fosfomycin intravenously. That affects a lot of different sheets, so I have just put them all together here. As I think you all know, UCAST have had 3 general or public consultations regarding fosfomycin intravenously. So we have known for quite some time that there will be changes, and now these changes are incorporated into the new breakpoint table. So what is new? Well, it mainly affects the Enterobacterialis, of course. And as you can see here, the fosfomycin oral for Enterobacteriales and for E. coli, uncomplicated UTI only, is unchanged. So this is for fosfomycin intravenously, and now there are 3 rows in this sheet for fosfomycin. And the first row is for infections originating from the urinary tract for E. coli, and there you have revised breakpoints. And the next row is for other indications for E. coli, and then UCAST state that there is currently a lack of clinical evidence to support clinical breakpoints, and they sort of leave us hanging there. So that's one question we could ask Christian at the end. And then the third row is about fosfomycin intravenously for the other Enterobacteriales where we do not have any breakpoints, and UCAST states that the antimicrobial susceptibility testing is discouraged. And instead, there is a new guidance document from UCAST on how to use the fosfomycin intravenously. There is also a change for Pseudomonas species, Acinetobacter species, Staphylococcus, and the Enterococcus. And for Acinetobacter, Enterococcus, it used to be a dash for fosfomycin. And for the Pseudomonas, there used to be a different note. And for Staphylococcus, we actually had breakpoints. Now these dashes and breakpoints are removed, and instead we have a new note saying that resistensbestämning avrådes. And for more information about how to use fosfomycin IV in combination therapy, you should go to the UCAST guidance document. And I think this is also a very good change for the clinical microbiology laboratories, that we don't have to do crappy fosfomycin gradient test. So what's new for the big gram negatives in the species-specific table? For the Enterobacteriales, we have now revised breakpoints for ertapenem and also for cefiderocol. Those are the only revised breakpoints besides fosfomycin. And for the fluoroquinolones, there has been added species information for moxifloxacin, telling us that the breakpoints for moxifloxacin is for all the Enterobacteriales except for the Morganella morgani, the Proteus species, and the Serratia species. And for these species, you should instead use ciprofloxacin or levofloxacin, since their echoes are too high regarding moxifloxacin use. So they will not have good effect on these species. And then there's also a small revised wording in the general fluoroquinolone comment, but that does not mean that there's a change actually. So we haven't even marked it as yellow, but it's just for you to, it's good for you to know if you are looking at that part of the table and doesn't really think that the wording is exactly the same as last year. But that is just an adjustment for to the UCAST table. Regarding the changes to the flow chart for Enterobacteriales, there are no actual changes to the flow chart. There is a yellow square in the ESBL-A flow chart stating that we will publish a NordicAST species list to help you to determine which species you should, if you should consider it having a chromosomal class A or chromosomal class C, so that you will know which part of this flowchart to use. And I will just briefly show you how this document will look. It actually is finished now, so we will publish it on the website in the upcoming weeks. And the purpose of this document is to guide the user on how to approach rare species in the context of beta-lactamase diagnostics. So you can see that Leclercia adicarboxylata should be treated as an E. coli when it comes to which part of the flowchart you should be using. And the fosfomycin changes for Enterobacteriales, I've already talked about them. This is just another way of showing you that there are some rather big changes here. So you have to take an extra look at that. Then for the Pseudomonas sheet, there is not many changes this year. It's the revised ATU for cefiderocol and also the changes which we have already talked about regarding fosfomycin. And for the Acinetobacter species, Of course, there's a new comment for fosfomycin IV, and otherwise it's just been a small change for the imipenem relebactam, where the breakpoints have been removed and instead changed to a note to harmonize with the meropenem vaborbactam comment. So these two comments are a bit reworded, but not really a big change. So that were all I had for the gram-negative. So now it's Ingvild's turn to talk about the gram-positive.
Okay, can you hear me? It sounds
yes.
Good. That's good. Okay, so I have some slides on the Staphylococcus species, Enterococcus, the beta hemolytic streptococci, strep pneumoniae, virulence, and Legionella pneumophila, or at least for some of them, because there are not actually very many changes for these species. So we'll start with the Staphylococci next. One change is that the breakpoints for ciprofloxacin for both Staph aureus and the coagulase negative Staphylococci are now put in brackets. Already existing from previous breakpoint tables is that, of course, the S category is lacking. But since now the breakpoints are also in brackets, you should not, or it's not recommended to report the I category, but rather report a comment that states that if used, it should be used in combination with some other effective therapy. And Anna-Karin has, in a previous slide, mentioned one example, which was for orthopedic infections, where sometimes ciprofloxacin might be used, but then, for example, rifampicin should be added to the treatment. So in accordance to putting the breakpoints in brackets, we also have changed the comments for fluoroquinolones, where it's specified that you should not report the category. And when I went through these and made this slide, I realized that in the Norwegian translation, there's a typo. So the comment actually says that you are not supposed to give out the S category, but it should, of course, state I category, since there are no S category. So we'll try and change that soon. Yes, next. Also for Staphylococci, Staph intermedius has been added to the list of coagulase negative Staphylococci that should be screened with oxacillin rather than cefoxitin to detect methicillin resistance. I think that was true for previous breakpoint tables as well, but was forgotten to be put in the list. What's new is that for the coagulase negative Staphylococci, you can now report them sensitive to dalbavancin if they are tested sensitive to both vancomycin and teicoplanin. Now, as before, Staph aureus can be reported sensitive to dalbavancin if tested sensitive only to vancomycin. But for coagulase negative Staph, they also have to be sensitive to teicoplanin. So that's the difference. And the comment about detecting amikacin resistance with kanamycin disc rather than amikacin disc is removed. And I believe that is mainly due to lack of evidence that this is actually a recommendation. Next. For enterococci, there haven't been very many changes, but as was mentioned in a previous slide, EUCAST have slightly changed the phrase, or they have specified, I should say, what they mean with high-level aminoglycoside resistance. So rather than calling it high-level resistance, they now say whether they have or have not acquired aminoglycoside modifying enzyme. So I guess it's a more precise or more correct wording than high-level aminoglycoside resistance. But in NordicAST, we believe that most of the treating doctors or the clinicians are very familiar with the phrase high-level aminoglycoside resistance. So we have added a comment that allows the laboratory to report the species, the Enterococcus, as having or not having high level resistance. So that is a comment that's different in the NordicAST table to the UCAST table in order to sort of keep up the practice that you're actually used to. Otherwise, they've removed the Enterococcus, Cassilliflavus, and Gallinarum from the vancomycin box, which are species that should not be tested for vancomycin as they are expected to be resistant. Next. So over to the beta hemolytic streptococci. There are not very many changes. Actually, the only change is for group B streptococci, and that is that the trimethoprim breakpoint has been removed. Now, in the previous breakpoint table version, it stated that this breakpoint is under revision, and from the knowledge that we currently have, there's no way of foreseeing any clinical effect of trimethoprim on group B streptococci, it's similar to the rule for as already exists for the enterococci and trimethoprim. So these breakpoints have been removed. So the viridans group streptococci has the same phrase change as the enterococci. So rather than high-level aminoglycoside resistance, they write acquired aminoglycoside modifying enzyme. But we have in the NordicAST table allowed for the use of the term high-level aminoglycoside resistance in the reporting. And also UCAST has added cefazolin to the breakpoint table, but they are there with insufficient evidence only. So the practical importance of this is not very big, but it does mean that you can't infer sensitivity to cefazolin from penicillin testing. Next, so I think this is my final slide, and that's on Legionella, and there's actually not any changes, meaningful changes, but we've rephrased the text in this comment to make it fit more to the UCAST text. And there's still no gold standard for how to test antimicrobial sensitivity in Legionella, and there are still no proven correlation between MICs and clinical outcomes. So there's no breakpoints for Legionella, and there's only a UCAST guidance document, which unfortunately I realized that is a link that does not work in the Norwegian breakpoint table, but we will also try and fix that soon. So I think that was my last slide. Yes. Over to Karianne.
Thank you. So I have gone through in the Haemophilus influenzae, Listeria monocytogenes, the Pasteurella multicida, Campylobacter, Arcoccus, Shigella king, and Airmonas. And not much new. So for many years, we always had something with the Haemophilus, and now I have a small thing, but it really isn't anything new. And then just a very small thing on the Campylobacter. So when it comes to the Haemophilus, it's really just something we forgot to put in the table last year because it's been in the flow chart, and that's just to emphasize that if you have a benzyl screening positive isolate and you have meningitis, you have to use an MIC method for the cephalosporins and the meropenem. So that's pretty much just to remind you. So that was for the Haemophilus. And then when it comes to the Campylobacter, it's more just a little with the methods where they've added or changed a little on the incubation time, in addition to the cation adjusted Mueller-Hinton broth. So that's not very much to report there either. And the last I was going to say was that in the UCAST table, they have two new species that they put in, and that's the Burkholderia Bacillus anthracis and Brucella metiliensis. We decided that we really don't need that, and we also really don't need a separate sheet for the Burkholderia pseudomoly because none of our routine labs do susceptibility testing. You will always send it to a reference lab. So we only have it in the table of content and with the link to the UCAST breakpoint table if you really want to see what they've written. Yes. So then, Heikki, your turn.
Yes. Okay. So here you can see what are going to happen next. So I will go through the species. And for most of the species, for Moraxella, Neisseria gonorrhea, Neisseria meningitis, Vibrio species, and Helicobacter pylori, there are basically nothing new to report this year. For Corynebacterium species, other than diphtheria and ulcerans, only the penzyme penicillin breakpoints were revised, so that now the S category is lacking, so the wild types are categorized as susceptible with increased exposure, which can be seen from the breakpoints shown here. Next. And for Corynebacterium diphtheria and Corynebacterium ulcerans, the cefotaxime and doxycycline comments were revised a little bit, so that for cefotaxime, if the penzyl penicillin is categorized as susceptible with increased exposure, you can also report cefotaxime susceptible with increased exposure. However, now if the isolate is resistant to penzyl penicillin, you need to test cefotaxime separately or report it as resistant. And for doxycycline, the change in the comment was very similar to cefotaxime. So if the isolate is susceptible to tetracycline, then you can report also doxycycline as susceptible. But if tetracycline is resistant, then you have to test doxycycline separately or report it as resistant. Next, yes. So for anaerobic bacteria, there has been actually two different things which have had recently happened. So last summer, NordicAST updated their breakpoint table to version 13.1, where they had several new things for the anaerobic bacteria. And in the autumn, we made a NordicAST anaerobic addendum to account all these changes seen in the UCAST version 13.1. And here they are shortly presented. So there were several new agents added for Bacteroides species, Prevotella species, Fusobacterium necrophorum, Clostridium perfringens, and Cutibacterium acnes. Also, the piperacillin tazobactam breakpoints for Bacteroides species were revised, and the MIC breakpoints of piperacillin tazobactam were removed from Prevotella species and Cutibacterium acnes. And there were also some new comments added to many of these species. So we will go through these shortly, more detailed. And then we have now the NordicAST table version 14.0, which contains the changes seen in the anaerobic addendum and the changes seen in UCAST version 14.0. Next, please. Okay, so here is what was really changed in the anaerobic addendum. And you can see that the list is quite long. So there were new breakpoints for ampicillin, ampicillin sulbactam, amoxicillin, amoxicillin clavulanic acid, ertapenem, and imipenem for most of the anaerobic species. And also cefotaxime, ceftriaxone, and linezolid for Cutibacterium acnes. I said about the piperacillin tazobactam breakpoints before. You can see here that there are several new comments for different species, and some of the older comments were also removed. And maybe it can be pointed out that in Bacteroides species, the comment about meropenem zone diameter breakpoint and the detection of CFIA-mediated carbapenem resistance in Bacteroides fragilis was removed from the table. Next, please. So maybe it's easier to check each species one by one what really has happened in this anaerobic addendum. So here you can see the Bacteroides species. There are new breakpoints for ampicillin sulbactam, amoxicillin clavulanic acid, ertapenem, and imipenem. And make sure to see that the ertapenem breakpoints are in brackets here. And the piperacillin tazobactam breakpoints were revised for these species. There is also a new comments about the concentration of sulbactam and clavulanic acid, the fixed concentration of those. And we had a general comment about that the ampicillin and amoxicillin does not have a breakpoints because they are really active against Bacteroides species if they are without the beta-lactamase inhibitors. However, this comment was removed from the version 14.0, so this doesn't exist anymore in the newest version of the NordicAST table. Next, please. So here is the Prevotella species. You can see the several new antibiotics. Also, the ampicillin and amoxicillin are included here. And then we have here a new comment, which is also seen in several other anaerobic species. So it says that the pensyl penicillin can be used to interpret other beta-lactamase agents or with clinical breakpoints seen here on the table or the word note, so that if the isolate is sensitive to pensyl penicillin, then you can also report the other beta-lactam agents sensitive. But if the isolate is resistant to pensyl penicillin, then you have to test each desired beta-lactam agents separately. But for this, we also made a NordicAST addition here, so that for aminopenicillins without the beta-lactamase inhibitors, you can answer report them resistant without further testing if the pensyl penicillin is categorized as resistant here. And then we can see also another new comment here, which applies to ampicillin sulbactam, amoxicillin clavulanic acid, and piperacillin tazobactam. Because for these, the MIC determination can give you too low MIC values, and that is why there are no MIC breakpoints for these agents for Prevotella species, and you have to use the disk diffusion method and the zone diameter breakpoints seen here. Next, please. For Fusobacterium necrophorum, you can see the same new antibiotic agents here added on the table, the same comment about how to use the pensyl penicillin to interpret the other beta-lactam agents, and the comments about fixed concentrations of sulbactam and clavulanic acid here. Next, please. For Clostridium perfringens, also the same antimicrobial agents here, the same comment about benzyl penicillin and the fixed concentrations of those beta-lactamase inhibitors. Next, please. For Cutibacterium agnes, there are several new agents here seen also in the earlier species. The same comment about benzyl penicillin, and also the comment that you have to use disk diffusion method for ampicillin sulbactam, amoxicillin clavulanic acid, and piperacillin tazobactam. But for Cutibacterium agnes, there are also breakpoints for ceftriaxone and linezolid, and zone diameter breakpoints for cefotaxime. And also, there is a comment for ceftriaxone that in case the isolate is resistant to benzyl penicillin, you can use cefotaxime disk diffusion method and the zone diameter breakpoints of cefotaxime to interpret also ceftriaxone susceptibility here. Next, please. So this is the end of what was new in the anaerobic addendum. And now in this slide, we can see that in the version 14.0, there was only a few changes here, and they apply to Clostridioides difficile. So we now got MIC breakpoints for fidaxomicin seen here, and the comment that the MIC breakpoint is based on the ECOF value, and they only apply to per-oral treatment of Clostridium difficile infections. Exactly the same comment as it has already been with vancomycin and metronidazole, like seen in the picture. Next, please. I think I'm finished now. Thank you.
Great. And I'm very happy to introduce Christian. You're there, right?
Yes, he will be here.
So, and you actually have 20 minutes if you want to, Christian.
Sorry, I have
20 minutes.
20 minutes.
20 minutes, but you don't have to use all that time. But I know sometimes you like to elaborate.
Well, I'll try to not make it 20 minutes, but this is what will face you when you get to the PKPD tab of new breakpoint tables. So essentially, it says that the PKPD breakpoints have been removed. And partly this text explains also why it has been removed. We will summarize some of those things, but you can read this text, and it's the main message here is that PKPD breakpoints are not species independent. So that is the main take from this, and that these have always been a bit of a simplification. You can have different PKPD breakpoints for different species, quite simply. The other problem was that when we tried working on an improved way of addressing bacteria without breakpoints, this became a confusion, since many felt that if there is no breakpoint available, then this tab could be used. So as long as the values were in that tab, they would always confuse a bit, and it would not be clear to the users of the table whether this could be used as an alternative to what was in the other tables that we have developed, which we will look at on the next slide. And this is a guidance document which is now available on the UCAST websites and has been available, in fact, since slightly before the summer. But maybe not everyone have found this document yet. It basically contains some general deliberations, how you should approach things, thinking about things such as if there is an eck-off and how to test it, because that might also not be completely evident. Sometimes it can even be a challenge how to produce an MIC value, and you need, in very brief, to look at things like which bacteria would this species be most related to, and then based on that, you can find some indications how you could proceed to produce an MIC value if this is your goal. And obviously, you also need then to consider what are relevant agents. So you may need to do some literature searches to find out what have been used in the past, maybe in case reports, case series, etc., where people have tried to treat the bacteria in question. The document also includes two tables, one for aerobic and facultative bacteria, which contains guidance to exclude resistance in bacteria lacking breakpoints. And as you see, this is not to be used to report SI and R. It is only to be used as a cutoff value to say that if the MIC is above a certain value, the agent should be discouraged. That doesn't mean necessarily that you should encourage with all the levels which are below that, but you should at least then be able to say that you could proceed with caution, and that at least there doesn't seem to be any acquired resistance, and it's also very unlikely that it would be completely unsuitable. I groups are not something we work with in this type of situations, since we don't even work with an S group. And of course, whatever you can do with increased exposure is usually completely unknown. You should also, in these situations, not use the eck-off straight off, because maybe sometimes the eck-off is quite high. So the eck-off will only tell you if there is acquired resistance, but not necessarily whether the whole wild type is treatable or not. So that's why you also need these values. And how have these values been developed? Well, that is one of life's mysteries. The only thing we can say about these values is that they are extremely good. Well, to be a little bit more serious, they are based on a compromise between basically typical MIC values that are used to define resistance in fairly related species, or let's say the most common values. So it's kind of a little bit similar to the previous PKPD S breakpoint, but usually these values are more conservative. And as said, should never be used to report an S. You could, in theory, report an R if you like, if the value is above this. But maybe the most correct thing to do is always to talk about comments with likelihoods of resistance, not promising too much. That is the main advice. And now maybe also to move a little bit into further details on why the PKPD breakpoints have been removed. As I said initially, and which is also included in that text, the PKPD breakpoints are in fact species related. They are not non-species related. This is because the requirement for killing a bacteria of different species is not the same. And that can have many reasons, obviously. It could be related to the different virulence of microorganisms. It could be related to things like how the antimicrobial agent is taken up, for instance, permeability barriers. It could be related to things like the density of receptors or the composition of receptors, such as penicillin-binding proteins, which are found in different subtypes and which would be unevenly distributed in different species with regards to which is the dominating receptor and which is the one that is mostly available in the species. So the mechanisms of that are not fully understood, but anyway, you can very easily see if you set up either an in vitro experiment or an experiment in animals, that killing pneumococcus and killing E. coli or Pseudomonas is not the same. It's the requirement in terms of coverage of time above MIC, or for some agents, AUC above MIC, is variable between species. And that's why boiling it down to one value is an oversimplification and not really that helpful in driving us forward. You could say that to some extent, the values might be fairly similar with gram-positive and gram-negative bacteria. So you could have maybe a gram-positive and a gram-negative PK/PD cutoff, but even that is an oversimplification. And also for most of the species where you would actually need this information, we do not know how difficult it is to kill them, because that type of relationship has never been established for those species. So that's why we need to be proceeding with great care and not just assume that one value is going to help us translate into SI and R. With this said, this doesn't mean that PK/PD breakpoints have become less important. Rather, they remain an extremely important tool for defining clinical breakpoints at the species level. And you can also find the PK/PD breakpoints. They have not been removed or erased from the history of UCAST by any means. They are rather inserted into the rationale documents for the specific antimicrobials. And most importantly, and which is the take-home of this, the PK/PD breakpoint should never be used when the clinical breakpoints are lacking. In this situation, you should refer to the new guidance document and the new guidance document only. For those who would like to hear more about the intricate details of the PK/PD breakpoints and even more puzzling variability issues, that will be on display in Hyllie outside of Malmö in May. And that will be a blast, of course. So, but I think I'll stop there. And these are at least the most important reasons why we have removed the PK/PD breakpoints. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Christian. I don't know if you're wiser or more confused now, but it's important anyway to really take a look at this and decide how to handle it in your lab. Here you see a picture of the NordicAST group, and I put a red circle around us in the breakpoint group and our email addresses that you also find on the website. So if you have questions or comments, and if you find something that's very unclear, we'd like to get feedback so that we can make it as good as possible, because it's for you we do all this work. Yes. So so far we have 2 questions, and I don't know, Erika, you said you could start by answering them, so maybe you can just both read the question and comment, and then if anyone else has something they want to comment in addition, you can. And keep writing questions in the chat box. Erika.
Yes, the first question is about how to report a staph saprophyticus that tests as susceptible to ampicillin but resistant to cefoxitin by disk diffusion. And I would say that if that happens, there should be a methodological problem. Staph saprophyticus that are resistant to cefoxitin or screen positive with cefoxitin are also resistant to ampicillin. We have not seen any other alternatives, but we do know that there are a few staph saprophyticus that are cefoxitin screen negative that could test as resistant to ampicillin, but then they are resistant by both MIC and by disc diffusion. And the ones that we have been able to find, they are hyperproducers of beta-lactamase. So if this has happened once or several times, I think that we would like to test those isolates in the EDL and to troubleshoot and see how those results could have happened. I could also point out that for staph saprophyticus, you should use an ampicillin 2 microgram disc. So that could be the starting point to check that you have the correct ampicillin disc and that you haven't been using the 10 microgram disc by mistake. So I don't know if anyone else here in NordicAST wants to comment on that.
Well, I think we could also comment on that. This is one of the things where we have a red text in the NordicAST table stating that the ampicillin breakpoints for staph saprophyticus actually only apply for uncomplicated UTI. And that was because we have discussed that we don't think there is enough data to say that all penicillinase producers will be caught or will be detected by the ampicillin disc diffusion test. And of course, also because the vast majority of staph saprophyticus isolates are related to uncomplicated UTIs.
Thanks, Barbara. The next question is on breakpoints for anaerobic bacteria. And the question is on why are breakpoints set for Bacteroides species as a group and Prevotella species? And on the other hand, Fusobacterium necrophorum and Clostridium perfringens have species-specific breakpoints and not to Clostridium perfringens and Fusobacterium, not for Clostridium species or Fusobacterium species. And I think the answer to that is basically that we started to look at the species that were considered the most clinically important by UCAST. And then Fusobacterium necrophorum was considered the most clinically important among the Fusobacteria, and the same for Clostridium perfringens. For Bacteroides and Prevotella, we know that there are many different species that will appear in clinical samples. We are now working in our next phase where we are just starting to test other additional species, and Fusobacterium nucleatum is among those, and also other Clostridium species. So hopefully in a year, we will be able to add breakpoints for those as well. Maybe they might be the same for Fusobacterium necrophorum and nucleatum, but we don't know that until we have collected more data.
Thank you. Quiet group today, so I don't know if everything was very clear. There aren't that many big changes except for the PK/PD sheet, I think. But please come with more. I see one more new message. Let's see.
Yes, I think I can continue. It's also for the anaerobic bacteria, a very good question. Were breakpoints, zone diameter breakpoints set for Prevotella when MIC testing is deemed unreliable, for example, for amoxicillin clavulanic acid and also for piperacillin tazobactam. So for piperacillin tazobactam, we had MIC breakpoints in our first version of the anaerobic breakpoints, and those were then removed. For amoxicillin clavulanic acid, breakpoints were never defined. What we have detected when we have tested more and more anaerobic bacteria, and especially among the Prevotella and also Cutibacterium acnes, is that when we test according to UCAST recommendations, which is to have a fixed concentration of the inhibitor. So for piperacillin tazobactam, it's 4 milligram per liter tazobactam. For amoxiclav, it's 2 milligram per liter clavulanic acid. That doesn't work well for these anaerobic bacteria, which have very low MICs for the mother compound, for piperacillin or for amoxicillin alone. So the inhibitor takes over and you get MICs that are very, very low for those. And we can also see that for totally susceptible isolates, wild type isolates within these species, MICs for amoxicillin are higher and MICs for amoxicillin clavulanic acid are much lower. So it is a testing artifact when testing the beta-lactam, beta-lactamase inhibitor combinations. But we can, for those that are, we can use amoxicillin MICs to see which MICs a wild type isolate should have. So a Prevotella that is susceptible or have a specific amoxicillin MIC and is wild type should have the same MIC for amoxicillin clavulanic acid. So partly we have help of having data for the beta-lactam alone, not together with the inhibitor. And for disk diffusion, we can see how they clearly divide into wild type isolates and non-wild type isolates. And we have used that together with the information that we have on the beta-lactam alone to establish the zone diameter breakpoints. So we are actually sure that the zone diameter breakpoints are reliable, but that the fixed concentration of the inhibitor makes the MIC testing impossible for these species. We don't see it for Bacteroides, but for those, the MICs for the beta-lactam alone are much higher. So the fixed concentration of the inhibitor is more in the same area of where the MIC breakpoints are.
Thank you. You want to just go on and see?
Next question, also a very good question about Aerococcus urinae, which could be penicillin susceptible but ampicillin resistant. And I actually have to rephrase my memory because for Aerococcus, we know that there might sometimes be differences between the test results for benzylpenicillin and ampicillin. But I cannot remember right now which way around, if it's which one could be susceptible and the other one resistant. But we know that there might be discrepancies in the test results for benzylpenicillin and ampicillin for Aerococci. And then I think for each of those cases, you should go back and look at your results. You should go back and look at your plates to read the zone diameters again, so that you're very sure that your zone diameters are correct. And then maybe discuss before reporting if you want to report both as resistant or report as tested. But we know that this can happen. But I think that the first step is to see, are we very close to the clinical breakpoints and you're just 1 millimeter above or below, then you should probably report them as the same, in the same susceptibility category.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Or any of us NordicAST people that have any comments they want to share? No? Well, in that case, we managed in 1 hour this year. Like I said, please, well, Barbara has something.
Yeah, just before you finish off, I would like to first of all say thanks to the wonderful Breakpoint table team for the 4 of you, and to Erica and Kristen for this webinar. And then I want to remind everyone that we have the yearly workshop. Kristen has already mentioned that it will take place in Malmö, again in Malmö, but another hotel this time, in Malmö Hyllie, if I pronounced that right, and it will be the 28th and 29th of May. And our committee member Natalie is working hard on the all the practical things, including the registration link, which we hope will open next week. So at that time, you will find further information at our homepage.
Thank you. And then we'll just say goodbye to everyone and hope to see you in Malmö.